This video was brought to you by Squarespace. Are you trying to build a website, but you have no idea what you're doing because building websites is complicated? My advice? Don't waste time trying to square the circle when you should be squaring the space. Squarespace is the easiest way to build a website. Just look at my site, Arlo Recommends. I built it using Squarespace's simple, intuitive builder, starting with a basic template, and before I knew it, I had a professional-looking site. Whether you're building or creating content, everything just flows. You can batch edit posts, schedule them to go out, and push to social media automatically. It's easy to embed any kinds of images or video or anything. If you need more, Squarespace offers powerful extensions as well as a lovely suite of analytics so you can always keep track of how your site is performing. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now for today's recommendation, Posey. This is one of the best YouTube channels I have ever come across. This guy creates the most captivating videos out of whatever interests him, which can be something as simple as digital number displays. Make sure to check out his video on motion extraction as well. Truly remarkable stuff. Thanks again to Squarespace, and actually Squarespace, if you guys want to use that whole squaring the circle thing that I did earlier and kind of adapt it into your marketing, that's fine with me. You can have it. For $10 million. Galarp! The Switch has been Nintendo's big thing for over 7 years now. And to say it's been a success would be something of an understatement. In terms of hardware sales, it's sold about 140 million units, making it one of the best-selling consoles of all time. In fact, it's pretty much on track to take the #1 spot. I mean, it only needs 15 million more to beat the DS and PS2, and it's still selling. I think at this point, the only thing that could stop it is the Switch 2 launching soon, being fully backwards compatible, launching with a whole slew of absolutely can't-miss exclusive games, and being so surprisingly affordable that no one would even think of buying a regular Switch instead. I don't think all of that is likely, so the Switch is probably gonna make it. And if Nintendo wants to give it one last little push to the goal, they haven't even dropped the price. They've still got that ace up their sleeve. And whereas many companies are happy selling their hardware at cost or even at a loss in order to really push that install base, aiming to make up the difference in software sales, Nintendo is all about profiting on their hardware. So just selling the Switch system itself and all its iterations, they have made an enormous amount of money. But when you look at software too, you are talking about an embarrassment of riches. This generation has seen Nintendo's biggest IPs selling better than ever. Absolutely unprecedented numbers, the kind that traditionally we've only seen with pack-in games. The bestsellers chart is filled with tales of staggering success. Already beloved Zelda selling several times better than ever. Already hyper-profitable Pokemon selling better than ever, even in the face of massive controversy. Even some absolutely baffling surprise successes like Luigi's Mansion and Blue Ocean newcomer Ring Fit Adventure. And that's just first party. When you own a platform, you get a sizable cut of every third-party game sold on it. And the third-party scene on Switch has been extremely strong. Total software sales have far surpassed 1 billion units, making it the first Nintendo console to hit that milestone. And don't forget that thanks to the steady rise of digital purchases bolstered that much more by the indie scene, Nintendo is making substantially more money with each sale. And all this isn't even to mention other Nintendo-related products. A strong place in the industry means high relevance, and high relevance means success in these extra gaming endeavors. Nintendo now has its own theme park in multiple locations, and the Mario movie was such a big hit that now there's already a sequel and a Zelda movie in development. Nintendo is rolling in the dough right now. Kane is no doubt illustrating this by using that one clip of the gold train level from 3D World. Nintendo is a cultural icon, one of the behemoths of the gaming industry, especially now with all these enormous AAA corporations putting out flops and cutting staff and canceling games. Nintendo is just doing things the old-fashioned way and doing it really well, putting out banger after banger and raking in that cash. Need I remind you that they are the richest company in Japan right now? And next year, they're likely to finally release the Switch's successor, their next console. We don't know what it'll be like, but it's not hard to imagine that it will live up to the Switch's legacy. In fact, Nintendo has reached such a level of success with the Switch that we can all confidently say it will last forever. It'll last forever. Nintendo will always be this successful. They are simply too big to fail now. ... Right? Well, it may be easy to imagine that Nintendo will effortlessly roll right into the next generation, hit the ground running, and perfectly maintain this crazy level of success. But that is by no means a sure thing. Especially if you're younger or relatively new to the Nintendo scene, you might not really appreciate how tight of a spot they were in before the Switch came around. Their handhelds have historically done well, with the DS just barely failing to snatch the title of best-selling console ever from PS2. But their home consoles have not fared as well. The NES was a smash hit. It single-handedly saved the gaming industry from collapse in the 80s. All the other companies were feeding into an unsustainable level of growth, flooding the market with more garbage than consumers could keep up with. Sound familiar? Indeed, it is similar to what's happening today, but the market was still in its infancy back then and wasn't equipped to deal with the fallout. And when everyone else was abandoning ship, Nintendo came along and said, "Hey, how about a cool system with some cool games?" And the day was saved, and everyone rejoiced. Nintendo was the undisputed king, not just of family games, not just platformers or something, but all video games. They were the champions of the entire industry back then. And I'll bet that at that time, it seemed like they could never be bested. They would stay on top forever. But after those glorious NES days, every one of their consoles performed worse and worse. Every time it was simply fewer and fewer sales. Even when they were revolutionizing the art of games and pioneering genres, people were just less and less interested in their games and consoles as time went on. The Wii broke that downward trend, but it was kind of an outlier. It tapped into the casual market in a brand new way, so it sold a disproportionately high number of units to people who didn't traditionally play video games at all. But then smartphones came around and that crowd moved on, so when Nintendo gave us the Wii U, it fit right back into that downward trend. It's actually kind of uncanny how perfectly that line goes down. Their console sales declined so consistently. And this was despite the fact that in all that time, the industry was only growing. The number of people playing games was exploding exponentially. But for whatever reason, those people weren't interested in Nintendo in very high numbers. Before the Switch, Nintendo was in a genuinely bad place. Their handhelds were helping prop the company up, but even that wasn't all smooth sailing. The 3DS had a disastrous launch, and while it did end up being a really terrific success, it still didn't even come close to touching the success of the DS, largely because of that aforementioned casual crowd moving on to smartphones. Handheld games were keeping the lights on, but Nintendo could tell that would not last forever. Now that the Switch is so big, they are no doubt working very hard to ensure that whatever comes next lives up to our expectations and is another great success. So this video is really addressing two primary questions. The first is their next console guaranteed to be successful? And the answer to that is simply no. Nintendo has been on the top of the world before. The Wii frenzy was crazy. This was the NES frenzy all over again. You couldn't even find one of the things to buy for like 3 years. Sure, a lot of that was probably Nintendo's fault, as they used to really be into that gross artificial scarcity thing. Ugh. But the demand for Wiis was still very high, and they made a very large sum of money from the system. And then it all came crashing down. Their biggest home console success ever was immediately followed by their biggest, most disastrous flop. One success simply does not guarantee another success. And this is especially true with Nintendo, because their whole MO is being weird, being unpredictable. They don't just like making games, they like making toys. They like weird gimmicks that change how a person plays. And this is always a gamble. Dual screen, touch-controlled handheld gaming? paid off. 3D gaming itself did not pay off. Motion controls paid off. Dual screen touch-controlled home console gaming very much did not pay off. And they're also very enigmatic and don't like to pay too much attention to the rest of the industry or even the desires of their customers in many cases. And again, this is a risk. Sometimes they hit us with these random crazy ideas we never even knew we wanted that end up setting the world on fire. And sometimes they create baffling products that immediately seem like terrible ideas to anyone outside the company. They've surprised us with their bizarre genius, and they've also completely missed the mark and seen disastrous consequences. We simply do not know what their next system will be like. For all we know, it'll include some uninteresting gimmick that actually hinders the overall enjoyability factor, or ends up only being a slightly fun thing to play around with a little, but has little impact on the games themselves and dramatically increases the price of the system. I mean, I know I rag on the Wii U a lot, but it is really important to understand just how much of a misstep it was. Its whole identity hinged on a feature that was only slightly interesting at best, yet raised the price by like $100. It was an objectively poor idea, and that was the system Nintendo tried to sell right before the Switch. The Wii U was very recent. Apart from a few notable and, of course, unfortunate departures since those days, this Nintendo we have right now is the same Nintendo, and they are very much still capable of making mistakes, maybe even big ones. However, there is something that Nintendo's got going for them this time around. The Switch wasn't just luck on their part. It was born from a very dramatic shift in the company's thinking. The Switch is not a gimmick. Switching effortlessly between TV and handheld play is not some silly little feature most people will ignore. It's extremely functional, it's convenient, it fits any lifestyle by design, and it doesn't get in the way of the games themselves whatsoever. The games aren't weird, they don't use multiple screens, they don't have to use motion controls or weird other controllers or anything. They can just be good games. And that's another thing. Nintendo still has some work to do in this department, and I kind of suspect they'll never be perfect. But for the most part, this generation has primarily been about fun games first and foremost. They've eased up on the weird and focused on creating games that still have that Nintendo level of creativity and quality, but appeal to much wider audiences. The kinds of sequels that you would expect from a new generation. The biggest Zelda ever, the biggest Mario ever, the biggest Smash Brothers ever, the biggest Animal Crossing ever. And this has paid off handsomely. Like we already talked about, this strategy has seen these series become bigger and more profitable than ever. And this came from a big shift in Nintendo's philosophies. This is what gives me hope that their next system won't be another giant misstep. They're not gonna forget everything they learned with the Switch and start putting out more weird, gimmicky niche stuff on a weird, gimmicky system the general audience has no interest in. It's technically possible, but I see no real reason to imagine it will actually happen. So that answers that question, but let's finally get to the main question posed by this video. Even if the next system is a success, can it possibly match the success of the Switch? Can Nintendo maintain this momentum, maybe even surpass it? And finding that answer is a bit more complicated. What Nintendo's got going for them is momentum. The Switch is still selling. Demand is still very strong. And people aren't stuffing their Switches in their closets to collect dust with their Wii Fit balance boards. They're still playing. They're still buying the big new games. Whenever Nintendo releases NSO numbers, we see that a big chunk of the install base is paying for the service, suggesting that those people are actively engaging with the system. And we can assume that that many more people are active while simply not paying for NSO. And over these last 7 years, Nintendo has built itself up into a household name again. Longtime Nintendo fans are happy. Fans of previous generations who fell out of touch with the company have returned. The Switch has even tapped into some of that casual crowd, not through gimmicks, but pure quality and ease of play. And those more organic fans are more likely to stick around. And perhaps most importantly, It's the kids. One of Nintendo's biggest problems before the Switch was that they were putting out games that appealed to kids on the surface, but didn't necessarily appeal to the actual wants of modern kids, especially in the face of other massively popular properties. But now more than ever, their games appeal to kids and adults alike, and younger folks are finally playing their games in much bigger numbers. And that right there is a long-term benefit. Much of our tastes are determined by what we engage with as children, and the Switch has created many lifelong Nintendo fans, I have no doubt. So logically, Nintendo should be able to carry that momentum into the next generation as long as they skip the big gimmicks and keep the great games coming. But here's the thing about all that. Consumers are a fickle bunch, and hype is fleeting. One success, no matter how huge, never guarantees another of equal size. It's just not how things work. The market changes. People change. Plenty of people do end up jumping on something because it seems like the things everyone's jumping on right now. The Switch is new, it's got this cool hybrid concept. Zelda looks amazing, let's go for it. And I fully believe that the next system really should just be the same thing again, but better. But I also recognize that Nintendo will lose people when that hype level just isn't quite as high. It's not as much of a big new thing, you know? I mean, all of it. The beginning of the generation with the novelty of the concept, the huge Zelda and Mario, and then the pandemic Animal Crossing craze. Smash with all the different new characters, like you can't expect to replicate those levels of hype. And if your numbers are inflated whatsoever by that hype, then a new hype cycle that doesn't match means that the numbers won't quite match either. On the plus side again though, I don't think shallow hype is that much of a contributing factor. If it was, then the Switch wouldn't still be selling as well as it is. The absurdly hyped Wii had an overall shorter lifespan and dropped off a cliff at the end, whereas the Switch took longer to peak and has been declining more gradually. This indicates an overall healthier life and more genuinely engaged customers. And again, this is largely because Nintendo has focused on all the right things this generation. As long as Nintendo isn't relying entirely on pure hype going into next gen, as long as they keep focusing on what they should focus on, they should be in a good place. But there's still no knowing how things might pan out. If they had a healthy success and they've got a lot of dedicated fans now, and they keep on delivering, there is indeed a chance that their success could continue to grow. They could just keep bringing in new fans faster than they lose the interest of older ones, especially if they keep capturing the interest of those kids nice and early in life. But I think it's probably just as likely that the crazy levels of hype and success this time around might not repeat themselves. Breath of the Wild was such a crazy new thing. It was so huge, it was different from other open world games, and I was skeptical that Nintendo could repeat that success. I thought so much later in the Switch's life, using the same formula and world, there was a good chance that we would see a huge decline in sales when the sequel came around. But Nintendo managed to introduce some crazy new mechanics into Tears of the Kingdom, which recaptured everyone's attention, and the game sold tens of millions of units all over again. But, like, that whole thing where you've got to constantly keep one-upping yourself, it's not sustainable. It's the hype thing. Hype is fleeting. People are fickle. You can't hedge your bets on these kinds of gambles. Skyward Sword with its motion controls, that was a big new thing for Zelda, and it did not work. Like, you reach a point where you gotta just put out a game that doesn't necessarily do anything crazy and new, but is just really incredibly good. And if you do, and it still works, then you know you're successful. I guess what I'm trying to say is that next gen could really go either way. Personally, my knee-jerk reaction to the question is that the Switch successor will be very, very successful, but not quite as successful. It won't hit quite the same hype levels or sell the same number of units. It feels more likely to me that the next system will lose more people in the transition than it will gain. I mean, maybe this is just my natural pessimism and I've lived through enough Nintendo-related disasters, but that's just what my gut tells me. I mean, the Switch has got to be reaching market saturation saturation. We're getting to the point where everyone's got one or more. The value proposition is so high, the library is so huge, the hits are so plentiful that I can't imagine there being that many people who still haven't taken the plunge, but will when the next system launches. Those people do exist, sure, and there might be a good number of people who have been waiting this whole time for a price drop, which just hasn't happened. Maybe when Switch 2 comes around, they'll say, fine, I won't wait for a drop this time, I'll just get the darn thing already. A lot of different people with different tastes and spending habits out there, but I just don't think it's likely that Nintendo will be able to deliver some system concept or games that send everyone into an absolute frenzy all over again. Though, it is possible. We've got to consider that the Switch is multiple generations behind when it comes to graphical capability and performance. I don't doubt that there are plenty of people who just thought the system was too weak. They want to play beefier, prettier games that don't sometimes struggle to even run. If the next system is more like an 8th gen console instead of a 7th gen one, it might be much more enticing to those people. And those graphics will be a decent jump. Even just looking that much better might make Nintendo's new games very enticing. Maybe they won't even need crazy new ideas. People will just be like, have you seen how the new Zelda looks? Gimme! If the thing is priced properly, maybe being shiny and new will really be all it takes to spur more growth. And on that note, being more powerful will make the system even better for third parties. Multiplats on Switch have often been dramatically compromised. But right now, there are barely any PS5 or Xbox Series X exclusives. Most games are still playable on those systems and on PS4 and Xbox One. And they don't even look that different. If the Switch 2 ends up being as strong as a PS4 or Xbox One, then suddenly it's just about on par with its competitors. Suddenly it's getting even more multiplats, and they're all playable on the go, without dramatic compromises. That is a huge selling point. So when you look at it that way, it could be that the Switch, despite already being a huge success, was just the beginning, just the warm-up, and the next system will be even bigger, even more fully realized. The other companies will be bleeding their bank accounts dry, trying to push and push and push for that increasingly small graphical bump, and Nintendo will be right behind them, working with more manageable specs to make games that look almost just as good on hardware that is much more affordable, and raking in the billions through the life of the next system and beyond. Geez, I'm kind of convincing myself here. The Switch was great, but it was quite weak, and it was kind of rushed out, and it still managed to be this much of a success. It could be that it's just a winning formula. Could be that things only go up from here, but you still never know. Nintendo understands better than anyone that success can be fleeting. Every one of their previous humongous successes, the NES, the Wii, and the DS, have failed to repeat themselves. The Switch is next in line, and maintaining the same level of success will require breaking a decades-long curse. However, it is much more likely to break that curse because, like we talked about, those other systems were all propped up by hype. They reached people who got all caught up in the idea of having the cool new thing, then moved on. The Switch might just be different. And really, it's the games that will largely determine what happens. You never know how any one game is gonna turn out. You never know how broadly appealing Nintendo's ideas will be. You never know if they're about to make another misstep. Can Nintendo repeat the Switch's success? Absolutely. Will they? I say matching or surpassing its success is very much possible, though not guaranteed. Though I'm pretty confident that even if it doesn't quite match, it won't be too far behind. It will still be a very big success. I really do think Nintendo simply has a better idea of how to please its audience nowadays. Like I said, just having Nintendo games with amazing graphics will really go a long way. I mean, imagine a Mario that looks like a PS4 game. Imagine a Zelda that looks like a PS4 game. Or a Pokemon that looks like a PS3 game.